Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I am your host, Joseph Carenza. In this episode, Michael Lindfield returns and we discuss the concept of the conclave, a gathering of wise spiritual teachers, which happens every 25 years into each new century, to assess humanity's progress and determine what new knowledge can be revealed. We explore references from the Agni Yoga teachings and Alice Bailey's writings about the last conclave in the 1920s, which was seeding information on atomic energy, colors, rays, and the power of sound. We ponder how the next conclave in 2025 may evaluate humanity's readiness for further spiritual evolution based on our moral and ethical standing. And we connect this to the Syrian law of freedom, which suggests that rather than be instructed, we're given free will to have realizations from within. This episode also examines humanity's role in the unfoldment of divine consciousness through embracing unity and love. And we hope you love this episode because we really liked making it. And if you do like this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation really helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We are incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Okay, here we go with the podcast, The Gathering of Wisdom. On the last episode of the podcast, we touched on a couple ideas, and one of which really stuck with me was the idea of the conclave, and also the Syrian law of wisdom. But I wanted to first start with the conclave. I mean, this is a fantastic idea. About 25 years into the beginning of a century, the masters of wisdom convene, and almost like the sort of the headmasters of a school, they set the curriculum.
Well, and they assess the capability of the students.
Yeah.
And what is the next evolutionary step?
Right.
Because we are here to evolve. Mm-hmm. We are to grow in consciousness. We are going to acquire more power. Mm-hmm. But the power is simply to carry out the greater destiny of humanity, the planet, the solar system, etc. Mm-hmm. So can we be trusted with the knowledge that we will be given in this next semester, if you want to go back to the school, because it is a school.
Well, something I found fascinating was that you were both on the podcast briefly, but off the podcast, explaining how at the last conclave, how they laid out the upcoming use of atomic energy, they were laying what sounds like at the time, explaining to people that didn't have the ability to understand things like the internet, things like AI, things like atomic energy, things like space travel. But it was so clearly laid out.
Well, okay, so what I love to do with these things is to demystify them. Mm-hmm. So it isn't this, oh my gosh, the masters. We've talked about the masters before and said, how about calling them postgraduate humans?
Right.
These are the beings who have graduated from classroom humanity with a degree.
Yeah.
Therefore, they embody wisdom. They are the masters of wisdom, not because they've got some diploma, but because they embody it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they are fantastic mentors to us who are still taking the degree. Mm-hmm. We have not yet graduated. So it's wonderful that we have mentors like that. And so it's said, as you hinted at, it's in like 1825, 1925, 2025, whatever the first 25-year number is, they gather to see, okay, what is the evolutionary need? What is the capacity? What are the conditions? Mm-hmm. What is wise to do? And sometimes it requires a little bit of a risk. Mm-hmm. So, and this is Michael's understanding. I mean, this is not what I've read in books, but I had this aha moment this morning when I was just thinking about this topic because I knew it would come up today. So in 1925, there was this gathering of this, if you like, the Wisdom Council. Mm-hmm. Call it the Wisdom Council. And they came up with these, hey, this is what needs to unfold, because the whole object is the continuous evolution of consciousness through a planet, through a solar system, through a galaxy. And everyone is there to support the evolution of consciousness, which is how life gets to know itself by experiencing itself firsthand. I mean, it's vast when you think of it like that. So anyway, just to give a practical example, I don't know this for a fact. It's just what I surmise. So in 1925, they met, this Wisdom Council, and then the following year in 1926, one of the members of the Wisdom Council who attended that conclave put out in a book through the person who was communicating on his behalf, somebody who was taking, if you like, dictation at a distance from him, and this woman was called Helena Roerich, and it's part of the Agni Yoga teachings. And if you read it, it's quite remarkable because in 1926, which is 1 year after the conclave, in a book called New Era Community, and they're in different paragraphs, and these paragraphs are called slokas. That's the name for them. So sloka number 16 says this, and it seems like mysterious, but the words are, "It is possible to whisper a great number of useful experiments into the strata of space." I want to get back to this later because this is how you seed the atmosphere with new possibilities. Then it says, atomic energy, condensation of prana, colored rays in space, harvest in connection with repeated explosions, and many another have been destined for humanity. It's like they agreed, okay, we're going to go into the science lab. We're going to let them into the big science lab. They're going to play with atomic energy. They're going to discover it. Mm-hmm. We know what happened in Atlantis when they had access to power and didn't have the moral fiber or the ethical standing to handle it. We had to pull the plug. We actually had to dismantle the school and send the students back on their way. And we as mentors, we withdrew. We talked about that. So at Atlantis, it said the Wisdom Council, who are our mentors, just said, hey, we're going to give this a break for a while. Mm-hmm. We're going to withdraw, let them regroup, grow back into some sort of ethical alignment, and then they can pick up the pieces again and pick up the objects of power. Mm-hmm. And that's where we are now. That's why it's said that we're at a higher turn of the spiral, meeting the same test that we met in Atlantis. How do you wield power wisely for the good of the whole? If it's for the self, it's self-destructive. If it's for the good of the whole, it nourishes and creates. So it wasn't just this one, and this was the member referred to as Master M or Moria. So he wrote through Helena Roerich this prophecy of atomic energy being destined for humanity. And then another one of the members of that council who attended also gave to their amanuensis, the person taking dictation at a distance. And I want to say, none of this is channeled. These two beings, these two members of the Wisdom Council, were living in physical bodies. The people writing the books were in physical bodies. They were both incarnate. It wasn't channeling some sort of discarnate entity. Some people have the capacity to take dictation at a distance. It's called telepathy. And they're really good at it. There are very few people who can channel, if you like, or receive a whole book. But this is what Alice Bailey did. Anyway, we've heard what Master M put out in 1926 about atomic energy. Alice Bailey wrote quite a number of books on behalf of Master DK, who basically is the person behind Meditation Mount. We're part of that lineage. He gave in one of the books called A Treatise on White Magic, he said, here's a view of the present and the future. And so this is what he said. He said, in 1936, this book was published, so it was probably put together in 34 and 35. It says, it might be noted here that 3 great discoveries are imminent, and during the next 2 generations will revolutionize modern thought and life. One is already sensed and is the subject of experiment and investigation, the releasing of the energy of the atom. This will completely change the economic and political situation in the world, for the latter is largely dependent upon the former. our mechanical civilization will be simplified and an era ushered in which we'll be free from the incubus of money, its possession and its non-possession. And the human family will recognize universally its status as a bridging kingdom between the three lower kingdoms of nature and the higher kingdoms with ourselves in the realm of souls. That was the ideal. We didn't make it quite that far because we weaponized our discovery. So the idea was to give us this access to atomic energy so we could be free from the dependency, not just of, coal, I mean, it's an environmental thing, but that we wouldn't have to worry about generating energy. Energy would be accessible so that we could get on with the work. And the work is being creative, being joyful. It could be being musicians, being philosophers, being artists, being whatever it is to create a society that expresses the freedom of spirit. And so we maybe want to tie this back into what you mentioned, the Syrian law of freedom later on. But let me just name briefly the other two things that Master D. Kane named, because the two members that we know about who attended that meeting, these two gave out this information about atomic energy. And then Master D.K. said, a second discovery will grow out of the present investigation as to light and color. It's about the effect of color on people. So it's understanding the rays, if you like, the effect of the rays, the deep rays that permeate and infuse all life, because they are the rays of creation. We know that from the seven rays. And so color will have an amazing effect on people. So that was, and then he said, the third development, which will be the last probably to take place, will be more strictly in the realm of what the occultists call magic. It will grow out of the study of sound and the effect of sound, and will put into man's hands a tremendous instrument in the world of creation. Because in the beginning was the word. So once we understand the power of sound as a creative force, but if we misuse it, it becomes a sonic laser, a destructive force. So he writes in this, a treatise on white magic, through the use of sound, the scientist of the future will bring about his results through sound. A new field of discovery will open up. The sound which every form in all kingdoms of nature gives forth will be studied and known, and changes will be brought about and new forms developed through its medium. One hint only may I give here, and that is that the release of energy in the atom is linked to this new coming science of sound. I mean,
Wow.
It's powerful stuff. We haven't unpacked all of that yet, Joey.
No, not at all. There's a lot to unpack there.
So, and I don't know if we're qualified to, we can unpack it and sort of look at the mystery and figure it out. But one of the things I did understand today, like a big aha, was that, so the conclave met. And then they said, okay, these are the things that we are now going to have as part of the curriculum. And these are the resources, and we're going to let them into the science lab. So the way that you bring about this new understanding is you seed the ethers with magnetic seeds. So they charge the field of imagination and inspiration. So somebody says, oh, atomic energy. You know, whether it's an Oppenheimer or an Einstein or whoever it is, picks up on something that has been seeded in the field. And that's why you'll find throughout history, often you get 2 or 3 people picking up on the same impulse at the same time. Whether it's Newton and Leibniz, who both picked up on calculus.
Right.
And then there was this, well, you know, you've stolen my idea. No, this is an idea that came to me. So the whole idea of intellectual property and intellectual rights, and I own this idea, is really, I mean, an aberration.
Yeah.
Anyway, to get back to this, if we think about the seeding of the field, and then we pick up on, an aha, oh, right. And then we're inspired. And I watched the movie Oppenheimer recently on a flight back from Italy. And it's a movie, but it was so powerful because it shows how scientists, through research, through openness, through prompting, through circumstance, and through the coming together of different minds and conditions, something is released. Unfortunately, we immediately weaponized it and didn't say, why don't we give this to the world now so everybody on the planet has free energy and doesn't have to worry about paying energy bills? Mm-hmm. We didn't do that because our heart was not in that place. Mm-hmm. We were still in very focused nationalistic tendencies rather than planetary awareness. So that's what we did with it.
Yeah.
So if you think of the work of Meditation Mount and creative meditation, we've talked before, we've got these principles and pathways. What we're doing with our creative meditation is dreaming, imagining a future world where we recognize the principle of essential divinity so that every person we meet, every being we meet, every animal is sacred, is essentially divine. Inside of every act or every creature of creation is a spark of the Creator. Now that changes everything when that's how you greet everything as an aspect of creation and one with you. And then the second principle of goodwill, which is basically love, is the currency, and love is the lifeblood that flows around and is the glue that holds everything together. When you understand that, then it changes everything. And then the third one, the principle is unanimity, when you understand that everything is part of this interdependent, interrelated, seamless web of life, then you can't harm a part without harming the whole. If I harm myself, I harm others. If I harm others, I harm myself. When we harm each other, we harm the whole ecosystem. So the idea with the work we do at Meditation Mount is through the power of focused thought, and energy follows thought, and the compassion of the heart to shape these images and seeds, like this spiritual architecture, these memes, these magnetic social memes of a future world. And then we send them out, we broadcast them into the ethers. Just like a farmer of old would have seeds and go and broadcast them on the fields. We broadcast these seeds into the etheric field. And hopefully it will magnetize and change the nature so it's more inspirational. And we talked about this before. Most of the images that are out there are dystopian. There aren't a lot of utopian or hope-filled images floating around in space when people pick up on it. And so if somebody's feeling depressed, very often they'll bump into a collective thought form, which is dystopian, and just go down the tube even further. Mm-hmm. So what my big aha was this morning, and it may only be for me, was that the whole of creation is a creative meditation process. First, you start with a dream. You magnetize the dream. It reaches a point of potency. And there are 3 words that describe a treatise on white magic, Alice Bailey's book. Potency produces precipitation. So when you've reached a point of potency, it precipitates. And how do you precipitate and send it out as a creative act? You sound it forth. In the beginning was the word. And going back to what DK just said, one hint only may I give you here about the science of sound, that the release of energy in the atom is linked to this new coming science of sound. So suddenly I realized that at every level, like a scalar process of creative meditation is taking place. And the whole, if you like, the mechanism or the protocol for the working out of this deep desire and dream within the Creator, about whom naught can be said, is the seeding of new possibilities and the creating of a receptive field that can pick up on those possibilities. It goes back to our analogy of seed and soil. You can have as many seeds as you like, but if they're just thrown on rocks, nothing's going to happen. So how do you cultivate the fertile field of human consciousness so it can germinate these new seeds. That's what creative meditation is about. That's what I believe the conclave's about. That we've got one next year, 2025. I'm assuming that there will be some new magnetic seeds sown inside the ethers. And over the coming years, we're going to go, wow, new things are going to be opening up because we are more receptive. So it goes back to the analogy I used before of David Bohm's enfolded universe. Like these seeds are enfolded, and they have to be like seeds planted in the soil. And what happens to a seed when it's planted in the soil? The seed case bursts open, and the life inside it starts to take shape. So the secret, based on the terminology that David Bohm uses, is that we are here to unfold the enfolded. We are here to sow the seeds of new possibilities, and in turn, we are here to be impressed and to receive the seeds that have been seeded by greater and wiser levels of consciousness so that we can take the next step. So it's a great chain of evolution and being. And that was the big aha today. As I say, it may only just be me. And as we said before, the disclaimer is don't believe a word that I say unless it resonates with you, unless you're willing to test it out in the, if you like, in the crucible of daily life. But I just want to offer that, Joey, as that's a big picture, but it has some very specific implications for everything we do, everything we think, and also how we handle power wisely. And don't just immediately go to weaponizing it.
I mean, how do you think that in the run up to the 2025, how do you think that the conclave will assess our progress? I mean, our readiness for the next phase of spiritual growth. What do you think the criteria is they use, and are we? Are we?
That for
ready?
me, this is the realm of speculation.
Yeah.
Michael has not been invited. No, I'm not sure if they're going to live stream it.
Yeah.
Maybe they are for those that have got the apparatus to pick it up. You
Right.
can, it's online. If I was to just use some common sense, what I would do is to say, okay, how far have we come? What is the capacity? But also, what is the moral standing or the ethical standing? Because we go back to, a fool with a tool. He's still a fool, but he's now more powerful because they got this power tool in their hands. So, and yet the whole objective of life is the continuous evolving of the one life through consciousness. Consciousness is an awareness of being. And meditation, in one respect, is the awareness of being aware. And then doing something with that awareness and access to deeper dimensions of being. So for me, if I were organizing, if I was facilitating the conclave, I guess we would all say, hey, how's humanity doing? What's the long-term plan? Because it's not year to year. There's a long-term plan for our planet. Our planet has a destiny, and it's tied up with Sirius. Let's get back to this.
Yeah.
Our planet has a destiny according to the Ageless Wisdom teachings. That destiny is known. It's called the will of God. We could call it just a planetary purpose, but in the old, if more like religious kind of terminology, it's the will of God. And what we see now we're segueing into freedom, is that, hey, I have the freedom to do whatever I want, whatever I will. Yeah, that's true. The will with a small w. But when we understand the deep destiny and purpose of the planet as the big W, then to do the will of the Creator is to do the will of our deepest self. It's not in conflict. And that's why you get in the Bible, the last words that Jesus uttered, if you like, apart from "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they doeth," and my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He basically said, "Not my will, but thine."
Right.
Which meant I align my smaller will with a higher will. I still am choosing, but I choose as part of identifying with something greater than my limited self. And Roberto Assagioli, who is our sort of inspiration and the founding father of Meditation Mount, he said, well, maybe rather than saying, not my will but thine, because he wrote a book called The Act of Will, he said, how about saying, I choose to do the will of the Creator? So it's a conscious choice. Therefore, we are choosing to do something that is actually serving something greater than our current understanding of who we are. That opens up the space for evolution. So I think it's that kind of assessment that would go on in the assembly. Do they have the capacity? Do they have the bandwidth to expand, but to expand without endangering everything around them? I'm talking about them being humans.
Yeah.
And often in the Agni Yoga books, Master M occasionally, there's a sort of disparaging, he calls them the bipeds. The bipeds. So the bipeds, the humans. But we have been given this gift of freedom in order to know for ourselves that we're part of something greater, rather than being told, you are part of something greater, now get with the program. It's a self-discovery.
Yeah, it is an interesting balance between the pursuit of personal freedom and spiritual growth, because it's like you can't, sometimes if you imagine a bowling alley, sometimes you have to turn the bumpers off and you have to roll with the gutters.
And that this is I think part of the assessment. There's a risk. It's like there's a tolerance. Well, look, there's a certain level of immorality in the world that would probably weaponize and do harm with this. However, at some point, this has to be faced. So can we hold this? Do we have a crucible strong enough to hold it? And these sort of wisdom council are not just people that give advice. They actually have the power to hold the field on our behalf.
Right.
Just as we, as parents, often have the field, we have the power to hold the field for children as they grow up until they step into their own power.
Right.
And make their own decisions and learn by falling on their face, getting up, and etc. So the idea of this law of freedom comes from Sirius. It's called the Syrian law of freedom. And I believe it's how we guarantee that consciousness is born from the inside. We've used this analogy before, Joey. If I had to say to you, I've got all these wonderful children, the children of my own imagination, the children of my own understanding and wisdom, would you like to adopt one? But it's not your child. You haven't given birth to it. Unless I have an aha moment that says, oh my gosh, yes. When that spark comes alive in me, when the light bulb goes on, I own that awareness. I own that awareness of who I am in a greater context. That's what evolution of consciousness feels like, looks like, smells like. So how do you give humanity the space to experience that big aha moment? Well, free will. What if we wreck the classroom while we're learning our lessons? Well, then we may have to live out in the open for a while and not be in a classroom. And then we say, okay, let's rebuild the classroom. Let's rebuild the temple. Let's get back to understanding why we're here. And that's why in a crisis, people go back to these existential questions of, who am I? Why am I here? What's it all about, Alfie? So the relationship, as it's taught in the Ageless Wisdom teachings between Sirius and the Earth, is a special one. I think we've talked about this in a couple of other podcasts, is the being that ensouls Sirius and the being that ensouls the Earth. They have a sort of a deep, ancient relationship. And I don't know the total mystery and the whys and the wherefores of all this, but I have a sense that somehow the Earth is acting as this stage in which this cosmic drama is being played out, this crucible in which this alchemical process of, can we release the light? Can consciousness grow from the densest matter? And we're doing it on behalf of life, because Earth is like, it's the Goldilocks planet on all levels. And so we're told that the being or the Lord of Sirius is sort of keeps an eye on us, and energetically there is a line of support from Sirius. In fact, Sirius, we're told, is the point of entry into our solar system for the energy of cosmic love. So the other reason that we're working with the Sirian law of freedom isn't so that we can do what we want to do and get away with it, is that we eventually can choose the ultimate choice, is to allow love into our life, to allow love to flow out of our life, to choose to be part of a loving universe. Now, that will only happen as a self-realized meta fact when each unit within that gets the aha. And that's what we're doing. But it's high risk. It's, this is Pottery Barn. I mean, you can break stuff, and you break something in Pottery Barn, you pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to pay for what we break, and not as punishment, but as a lesson. So, I mean, I put out a lot of stuff there. A lot of it just was an insight, a deep insight I had today. And what I find with insights, they're like seed packages. And then when you unpack them, they're much more than you've initially understood. So what you thought was just a sentence, it sort of just opens up. Mm-hmm. It's like the enfolded is unfolded. So what does that stimulate in you? Where do we go from here, Joey?
Well, it does bring up this idea that, the Syrian law of freedom tends to emphasize like liberation from bondage to the material world.
Yes.
Right. So is this ultimately teaching us how to be, the idea is that we're learning how to be a non-embodied intelligence, or
Mm-hmm.
what does that look like? I mean, is it, I mean, when you say it's the fractals of the one, are we creating one new conscious intelligence? Is that the farm that we're on?
Well, put it this way. There are three stages. I use this as a very simple analogy. Mm-hmm. If you look at I am, the statement I am. So in the beginning, the Creator could say I am, but that I am is not a deep knowing of self yet. It's just an internal statement of I am. Mm-hmm. And then in order to discover who the I am is, it projects itself outside, and you become the I am that. Mm-hmm. And then once you go, oh my God, I'm not all of that outside. That's right. All the not self. I'm the self. Oh, I am the I am that I am. Mm-hmm. And then that duh moment, that cosmic duh moment comes where the universe becomes self-realized. But it had to do that by breaking away from the I am state and going into a discovery state of choosing a path and then believing that I am that. I am this, I am that, I am this, I am that. Mm-hmm. And then realizing that this and the that's are just forms that point me back to who I am, because I am that I am. Now, that can be a very fancy statement until it's actually a self-realized fact. And I believe the whole of creation has been set in motion so that the one can know itself, touch itself, realize itself. I mean, I don't have the capacity to fully understand that much in life. I mean, we're growing each day as we live in this classroom. Mm. Sometimes it's best just to leave it as the great mystery.
Right.
But the thing about freedom and liberation is important, because during the Second World War, when things got really dark in 1941 and 42, mm-hmm. There was in that era, there was a prayer, an affirmation, a mantra put out that invoked, may the Lords of Liberation issue forth. Mm-hmm. Basically say, come forth, O mighty ones, mm-hmm. and bring light into this darkness. And so we were calling on the Lords of Liberation. But first of all, in order for that power to flow, we have to be liberated ourselves. Once again, we talked about this before. We've got the Wisdom Council is not going to come and bail us out.
Right.
I see them as spiritual first responders. There's a cry for help from the heart of humanity. We need help. So they go, okay, try this, try that if you wish, if you choose. Not because we said so, mm-hmm. but because it resonates in your heart as the right thing to do. And when it resonates in your heart as the right thing to do, it will make a difference. Otherwise, you're just following orders.
Right. Yeah.
Is that crystal clear?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it tends to kind of dovetail with this idea of a computational universe. Of, are we unique in that we're given the option to like, here's an option. You can take this option; it's a good option, but you can also take this other option.
But the thing is that I believe the one life doesn't yet fully know itself, and we're part of this knowing,
right?
The unfolding of knowing, and therefore it is both predestined and predetermined and not determined.
Right.
It's both premeditated and meditated in the moment. It's both. It's both and, Joey.
Yeah.
It's like the seed contains a promise. That promise is the promise.
Right.
But what changes is our capacity to deliver on that promise in all the wonderful ways as we're growing our capacity in our artistry. I mean, everything that's created is different from what's been before. It may resemble slightly, but every act of creation has to be a new one, like every snowflake is a different shape. That's how it works. You can't have two things identical. You can have them in resonance, but two identical things can't exist.
Yeah.
But fractals of the one can coexist.
Right.
Wow, this is a deep conversation.
Yeah. There's a question that came up for me. I wanted to, if we can, just go back to the conclave for a moment. So there was, like, in the last conclave era, and even before that, there's been these scribes, sort of, the Rorics, Alice Bailey. But who is out there now? Like, who, or is it a specific person, or do you think like this? How will the information come, do you think, from the next conclave? Will it come through more of a collective consciousness, or will it?
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
Yes and yes, because the idea in evolution is to grow a greater field of receptivity, which is why we do group meditation here.
Right.
It isn't just me, so I become the new scribe. No, it's humanity itself. But how does humanity start to receive as a receptive field? By having little microclimates of receptivity, and then these are linked, like an array of antenna. These are linked together, and that's why we have this network of light around the world. The network of light is this receptive field that can receive, register, respond to the impulses that are being seeded in the field.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really very important concept, especially, given that we are a physical location here at Meditation Mount, and we're actually doing these practices. But I think there's much more of maybe not resistance, but apprehension to sort of a top-down approach. Like, people, I think, were more receptive to the books written by Alice Bailey, the Agni Yoga books.
Right.
Well, now people want to have that personal experience.
Well, see, that's it. We want to have the personal experience of a greater self.
Right.
So it isn't you've got to throw out the master. No, the masters of wisdom are still the masters of wisdom. What we're growing into is understanding what it means to be wise. It means not to be limited by an individual sense of self.
Right. And I think that's kind of it's being birthed, in all the kind of various different ways. If you just take kind of a overview of various things online, they kind of have a theme to them, even if it's sloppy,
right?
But slowly opening up to this idea that there is more than just the self.
Well, exactly, and this is open source stuff,
right?
And look, we are in the 2-month period from April the 21st to June the 20th of group endeavor, the pathway of group endeavor. Now, group endeavor is not that you've all got to march in lockstep. No, group endeavor says, how do we understand that we're part of one life? By working together and realizing that all our parts come together, and that this move from I to we, in fact, is an expansion of my sense of self. It's not a loss of my identity. In fact, it's an expansion of my identity. And that's what expansion of consciousness is. It's an expansion of our sense of identity, which is why Roberto Assagioli says in order to shift from one stage to another, you have to disidentify and then re-identify at a greater space capacity.
Right. That's a concept that in and of itself is a huge one to wrap around.
Yeah.
For most people to wrap their heads around. Like how do you divorce yourself from that concept of it?
Well, yeah, because I've been charged with taking care of Michael. This is my universe. I'm responsible for the universe of Michael.
Right.
And if I don't have something, I'm going to go out and get it. I mean, it's called survival of the planet Michael.
Right.
Now, when I realize I'm part of a constellation of other beings, it's different.
I find it relieving. I think it might be scary to some people, but I find great relief and great meaning in where you can often find sort of an apathetic or a cold universe. Like this idea that we're this one life is actually quite refreshing.
Okay, it's cold fusion.
Yeah, there you go.
See, cold fusion means non-emotional.
Yeah.
Cold, actually, the fire of love. One of the things I remember, I remember so few things from my days at school.
Yeah.
I mean, because I won't go into what it's like to go to a boys' school in England in the 50s. But anyway, one thing's in the science lab where we put a paper over a gas flame and realized that the blue flame in the center is cold. It doesn't burn. And you realize there is a fire that warms but does not burn. But fire itself will transform everything. And maybe that's another subject we can get into at some point, because when we look at what's happening on the planet at the moment and the conflagration that's happening, the fire, not only climatically are we heating up now, but things are catching fire. And we go back to then the preachers who tell us that we are now in for hellfire. And others who say, no, this is the pathway to the fire of love. So this is a whole another topic for another podcast, Joey. But to just refocus on the theme that we've sort of find ourselves in now, in order to pick up on what is being asked of us next, or we're being invited to step into next, we have to have an open heart and open mind. The open heart and the open mind, when we link it with other open hearts and open minds, becomes this collective field of impression. We become the negative, we become the mother aspect. We receive the seeds from deep space, deep dimensional space, and they grow inside the fertile field of our collective consciousness. And then something new is being born. And then once we have an aha, we turn around and we create our own imagination of a brighter future, and we seed the ethers around us. So it's this great chain of constant expansion and creation and evolution. It's a mystery. I mean, I can't wrap my head around it. I can open my heart to appreciate the beauty of it and the mystery of it. But if I think I can figure it out, I got another thought coming.
That is a temptation, isn't it, to try to...
Yeah, let me figure it out. I can't figure this out. Well, of course you can't figure it out. It's not meant to be figured out. It's meant to be lived and experienced.
Right. Yeah, that's also sort of the Douglas Adams idea. When he's just, it's just, that's just general paranoia. Just get on with your day.
Don't panic.
Yeah, don't panic. I just more and more, the more I study, the more I grow, the more Douglas Adams is becoming Saint Douglas Adams.
I am a fan of. I listened to the first broadcast of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that was broadcast on BBC radio in 1970. Yeah, and it was like, wow. So it is, and it's like these things are opening, and just as certain movies are eye-opening, certain books, they're eye-opening. They're heart-opening, they're mind-opening. And when we open up our apertures, we receive more light.
I mean, that's a very simple but very profound concept. The more you open, the more you can receive. Instead of the more you clench and the more you hold and the more you try to gather, the less you can hold.
Well, that was the classic example of how do you trap a monkey? Well, you have you have this sort of pot with a narrow neck to it, and you put peanuts in it, and the monkey can just squeeze their hand through it. But when they grab hold of the peanuts in a fist, you can't remove the fist with the peanuts through the narrow-necked jug. You have to let go. And so it goes back to the only way to receive is to give. The only way to have is to let go. We went through this when we did Scorpio. The only way to rise is by kneeling.
Right.
Is because you enter into something rather than try to claim it.
That's a
the
big
growth
change.
of consciousness is not colonialization.
I was going to say
It's not. That's just.
Let's just linger there for a second. It's a paradigm shift.
It is.
You're not trying to plant the flag here.
No. No, you're expanding yourself so that we become it. So how do you bring all the peoples of the world together? By understanding that each human being understanding, I am part of a human family, one human family. Ah, what a relief. Rather than, well, I'll accept that, but my nation's flag cannot be lowered in a ceremony,
right?
Which is true. The American flag is the only one that can't be lowered. Where others, when they walk past a saluting station, the flags are lowered. Except for that, I'm not picking on one. I'm just saying there is a time when the part becomes we're doing it because we want to show that our part is important. Then we get to the point where we want to show that life is important, and life basically is an expression of love. So it goes back to we're here to be loved.
That's right.
To be loved, to love, and to create a society with love as the foundation, which goes back to the principle of goodwill. So it's interesting that even the small practices that we do have meta ramifications and are part of this great scalar process called creation, which is the mechanism for the self-realization of a life that needs to know itself. And as they say, there's only one being in this world, and we are it.
That's right.
There's only one being on this podcast, and we're all it.
That's correct. That's true. All right. And that's also a great place to wrap.
Thank you. Be here now, Joy.
That's right.
Together.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joy.